Elvis was mid-song when he saw her, sitting in the front row, unable to stand. He stopped, pointed, and asked security to bring her on stage. What happened next stunned the entire arena and became one of the most talked-about moments of his career. In this video, you'll see the moment Elvis turned a concert into something unforgettable, and why that night still gives fans chills decades later. A young woman from rural Tupelo woke before dawn every morning on her family's cotton farm. While most 19-year-olds were still dreaming, she was already walking through the dark fields with her homemade guitar. She'd fashioned it herself from scrap wood and fishing line when she was 14. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was hers. As the sun came up, she would sing Elvis songs while picking cotton or feeding the chickens. Her voice carried across the empty fields. "Love Me Tender" echoed through the morning mist. "Can't Help Falling in Love" floated over the rows of crops. Her younger brother would sometimes hear her from the house and say she sounded just like the radio. The family lived paycheck to paycheck, sometimes without electricity, with barely enough to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs. Still, she found hope in knowing that a young boy from the same town had once become a star. If he could make it out of Tupelo and become famous, maybe she could too. Her mother worried constantly about her dreams. She'd say, "Honey, you need to think about practical things. Maybe you could work at the dime store or learn to type." She had seen too many young people chase impossible dreams and end up broke and bitter. She wanted her daughter to be realistic. But the young woman wouldn't give up. She entered talent shows across the county, winning prizes with her raw, honest voice that made people believe every word. She saved every nickel and dime to buy a real guitar from the music store in town. After 2 years, she had enough for a used acoustic that actually stayed in tune. The congregation at First Baptist noticed her voice right away. The pastor asked her to sing solo during Sunday service twice a month. Old folks would wipe their eyes when she sang hymns. Young mothers would hum along. Her voice had something special, a tremor that touched hearts. By December 1971, she had made her decision. She was going to Memphis to audition at the same studio where her idol had recorded his first song. With only a few dollars and her guitar, she set out for Memphis to try her luck at the place where dreams came true. On December 3, 1971, she stood on Highway 78 with her thumb out. A blue Chevrolet pulled over. The driver was heading to Memphis and offered her a ride. She climbed into the passenger seat, her guitar in the back, filled with hope and determination. She had no idea this stranger's car would become the site of an accident that would change everything. The crash happened on a busy highway just outside town when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into the passenger side at full speed. The impact threw the young woman from the car, leaving her unconscious in a nearby field. When the ambulance finally arrived, she was barely breathing. She didn't wake up until 2 days later in the intensive care unit. When she tried to move her legs, nothing happened. She couldn't feel anything below her waist. The doctor broke the news to her parents first. Multiple vertebrae in her lower spine had been crushed on impact. The damage was severe, and he used words like likely permanent and minimal chance of recovery. Her mother collapsed in the hospital hallway when she heard the diagnosis. They'd brought their daughter to Memphis to chase her dreams, and now she might never walk again. The medical bills started arriving within days. Surgery consultations, specialist fees, x-rays, and scans. The costs were staggering, far beyond what a farming family could ever afford. The young woman broke down completely when the doctors explained her condition. She screamed and refused to eat for days. The girl who had sung with such hope in the cotton fields couldn't imagine a life where she couldn't even stand on stage. She told her mother she wanted to die. One doctor mentioned a possibility. A surgeon in Memphis was performing experimental spinal fusion surgery using titanium rods to rebuild damaged vertebrae. The procedure was risky and expensive. Results were mixed. Some patients regained partial feeling in their legs, others saw no improvement at all. The surgery alone would cost thousands, not counting months of physical therapy afterward. The family tried everything to raise the money. Her father sold their livestock and farm equipment. Her mother pawned her wedding ring and grandmother's china. They borrowed against the farm, putting their home at risk. The total still wasn't enough. Word spread through their small community about the situation. The church held fundraisers. The high school organized events. Local farmers passed a hat at the feed store. The town raised what it could, but they fell far short of the total required. By March, the family had exhausted every option. The surgeon's office required payment up front before scheduling surgery. Her father sat beside her hospital bed and told her they'd tried everything. They would have to accept that she might spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. She stared out the window at the parking lot below, watching people walk to their cars and taking each step for granted. 3 months had passed since the accident, and hope was fading fast. Then, one morning, her mother made the drive back to their farm to collect the mail that had been piling up. Among the stack of bills and notices was a plain white envelope with no return address. After months of medical bills arriving daily, her mother almost tossed it straight into the trash. Something about it felt different, but she had learned not to get her hopes up about anything anymore. She opened it while standing in her kitchen, still wearing her coat from the drive. Inside was a cashier's check, large enough to cover the surgery and recovery. Attached was a small piece of white paper with a message written in careful handwriting, "For the surgery and recovery." Her hands started shaking. She read the amount 3 more times to make sure she wasn't seeing things. More money than their family had ever seen in one place. She sat down hard in her kitchen chair and started crying. Her husband came in from the barn and found his wife holding the envelope with tears streaming down her face. She handed him the check without saying a word. His reaction was the same as hers: complete shock, then confusion, then suspicion. Who knew about their daughter's situation? They'd kept her condition mostly private. Only family and close friends knew the details about the surgery costs. His first thought was that someone was playing a cruel joke on them. Maybe the check was fake or stolen. He called the bank number printed on the check that same afternoon. The representative confirmed that the cashier's check was legitimate, and the funds had already been verified. The money was real, and it was theirs. They drove to the hospital that evening to tell their daughter. She was lying in bed reading a magazine when they walked into her room. Her father pulled a chair close to her bedside. Her mother stood at the foot of the bed holding the envelope. They explained about finding the check in their mailbox. They showed her the handwritten note. She read the message and for the first time in months smiled. Not a forced smile to make them feel better, but a real one that reached her eyes. She asked if this meant she could have the surgery. Her father nodded and told her they'd already called the doctor's office. The hope that had been missing from her face for months came flooding back. She grabbed her mother's hand and squeezed it tight. Her mother hadn't seen her daughter look this alive since before the accident. She started asking questions about the surgery, about recovery time, about when they could schedule it. The doctor's office called them back the next morning. She was scheduled for surgery within the week. The mysterious benefactor had given them more than money. They'd given her future back. But one question haunted the entire family. Who was their guardian angel, and how did they know exactly what she needed? The answer to that mystery had begun weeks earlier in a recording studio across town, where someone had been listening to a very different kind of conversation. Marian Kiesker was working late at Sun Records in Memphis when she overheard a conversation that would change everything. Marian had been Sam Phillips's assistant since 1950, and was the woman who first recognized something special in a young truck driver named Elvis when he walked into the studio in 1954. According to accounts that later surfaced, Marion heard a young man in the hallway talking to someone from a local radio station about getting airtime for a fundraising announcement. The voice was desperate, pleading. She stopped what she was doing to listen. The young man explained that his cousin had been in a car accident. She was paralyzed and needed surgery that cost more than his family could ever afford. He mentioned that his cousin was from Tupelo and had been singing Elvis songs since she was a little girl. She dreamed of becoming a professional singer before the accident changed everything. Marion felt something stir when she heard the word Tupelo. That was Elvis's hometown. She'd heard hundreds of sob stories over the years from people wanting handouts or favors. This felt different. The young man wasn't asking for money or trying to meet Elvis. He just wanted a radio station to mention his cousin's situation on the air. The radio station turned him down. They didn't do personal fundraising announcements. Marion watched through her office window as the young man walked down Union Avenue with his shoulders slumped. According to the accounts, Marion spent the next week quietly investigating the story. She called information and got the number for the family in Tupelo. She spoke with the mother directly, pretending to be from a Memphis charity organization. The mother confirmed everything. Her daughter had been singing Elvis songs in their cotton fields since childhood. The accident had crushed her spine. The surgery in Memphis was their only hope. Marion also learned that the girl used to walk past Elvis's childhood home for inspiration. She had grown up poor, just like Elvis had. She'd made her own guitar from scrap wood. She sang in the church choir and won local talent shows. The parallels to Elvis's own story were impossible to ignore. When Elvis came to Sun Records to visit Sam Phillips and reminisce about the old days, Marion waited until he was sitting alone in the studio where he'd recorded That's All Right years earlier. She told him about the girl from Tupelo. She mentioned the singing in cotton fields, the homemade guitar, the accident that had crushed her dreams. Elvis listened without interrupting. When Marion finished talking, Elvis was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked how much the girl needed for her surgery. Marion told him the amount. According to the accounts, he nodded once and said he would take care of it. The whole conversation took less than 5 minutes. He insisted the gift remain anonymous. But how would the money reach a hospital room hundreds of miles away? And would the risky surgery that followed actually work? She underwent a risky, experimental spinal operation in Memphis. The surgeon explained the procedure one final time to her parents in the hallway. He would need to work around her spinal cord without damaging it further. One wrong move could leave her completely paralyzed from the neck down. The operation would take several hours, possibly longer. Her parents found the hospital chapel on the 2nd floor. The small room had wooden pews and a simple cross on the wall. They sat in the front row and prayed together. Her mother held her husband's hand and asked God to guide the surgeon's hands. Her father prayed for strength to handle whatever news they received. What they didn't know was that Elvis Presley had visited this same chapel many times over the years, seeking comfort during his own mother's illness. The surgery stretched on for hours. Nurses came and went from the operating room. The surgeon took one short break to drink coffee and stretch his back. Her parents waited in the chapel, then moved to the surgical waiting area, then back to the chapel again. They couldn't sit still. When the surgeon finally emerged from the operating room, still wearing his surgical scrubs, his face was tired but calm. He told her parents that the surgery had gone as well as possible. Titanium rods were in place to stabilize her spine. Her spinal cord appeared undamaged, but they wouldn't know about nerve function until she woke up and the swelling went down. She slept for nearly a day after the surgery. When she opened her eyes, her first words were asking if she could move her legs. The doctor told her to be patient. The next few days would tell them everything they needed to know. Days after the surgery, she felt a tingling sensation in her left foot. She stared at her toes under the white hospital sheet. She concentrated as hard as she could. Her big toe moved just a fraction of an inch. Then her second toe twitched. Her father was sitting beside her bed reading a newspaper when she started crying. He looked up, worried something was wrong. She pointed at her feet and whispered that she could feel them. The months that followed were grueling. Physical therapy started with learning to sit up without assistance, then standing with parallel bars, then taking single steps with a walker. The mysterious benefactor had covered all the therapy costs, allowing her to work with the best specialists in Memphis. She spent 4 hours a day rebuilding muscles that had been dormant for months. Her determination came from gratitude to whoever had saved her life. She didn't know their identity, but she felt responsible to make their investment worthwhile. Every painful step forward was her way of saying thank you. 8 months after the accident, she walked across her hospital room without any assistance. But the girl who had once sung Elvis songs in cotton fields would discover that surviving tragedy had changed more than just her ability to walk. Her voice carried new depths that hadn't been there before the accident. The months of pain and recovery had added layers she'd never had before. Every note carried the weight of someone who had faced losing everything and found a way back. She sang with the emotional depth that only comes from surviving real trauma. When she started performing at local churches again, the congregation at First Baptist noticed the difference right away. When she sang hymns now, grown men wiped their eyes. Her voice had an honesty that reached people in a way it never had before the accident. She appreciated every single note she could sing because she remembered what silence felt like. Record executives were wary because of her medical history. They worried about liability issues and saw her recovery as a risk instead of proof of her determination. She kept auditioning anyway, driving to Nashville every few months with her guitar and her dreams. Each rejection stung, but she refused to give up. The person who had saved her life with that anonymous gift deserved better than a quitter. The breakthrough came at a church revival, when a music producer happened to be visiting family in the congregation. When she sang Amazing Grace that night, the entire church fell silent. Her voice filled every corner of the building. He approached her after the service and asked if she'd ever considered recording gospel music professionally. She eventually signed with a small gospel label and recorded several albums. Her music told stories of faith and recovery without mentioning the accident directly. But more importantly, she used her growing platform to help families facing medical crises. She started performing benefit concerts for accident victims who couldn't afford treatment. She contacted hospitals and offered to cover surgery costs for patients without insurance. Because someone had helped her when she had nothing, she spent the rest of her life helping others. By the late 1970s, she had personally helped dozens of families pay for life-saving medical procedures. Her foundation raised money for people in desperate situations, just like she had been. All this time, she searched for the identity of her mysterious benefactor. She hired a private investigator in Memphis. She contacted every charity organization in Tennessee. She even placed ads in local newspapers asking for information. Nothing led anywhere. The person who had saved her life remained completely anonymous. She never forgot that someone had believed in her when she had nothing. Every family she helped, every surgery she funded, every life she saved was her way of paying forward the gift that had been given to her. She often wondered if her benefactor knew about the ripple effect their kindness had created. Then, in August 1977, everything changed. The news that would rock the world would also finally reveal the truth she had been searching for all these years. After the performer's death in August 1977, those who knew the story revealed that he had arranged the gift and insisted it remain secret. Marion Keisker finally made the phone call she'd kept to herself for 5 years, telling the young woman the complete truth about her mysterious benefactor. She cried for hours after learning the identity of the person who had saved her life, tears of gratitude mixed with grief that she could never thank him face to face. But his act of quiet generosity had set off a lifetime of giving to others. The foundation she established has helped hundreds of families pay for life-saving medical treatments they couldn't afford. Each family she helps is her way of honoring the gift that changed everything. If this story moved you, share it with someone who remembers Elvis or loves a story about quiet generosity. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoy these behind-the-scenes stories about the king of rock and roll.